A little while ago, I made a video on some smart LED strips I bought in my local supermarket and dissected their real world value, and discovered that they're actually not as good a deal as they initially appeared. But I was recently taking a stroll through another large store chain, which I'm sure you'll be able to guess from the shop, and discovered this little gem. This here is a ready-built smart LED strip which includes an addressable 24-volt neon LED strip, and when I spotted it I couldn't quite believe it, especially when I noticed how cheap it was, and that you get the full 5-meter strip. So naturally I just had to pick one up to see if the deal was too good to be true. So why am I so amazed by this strip? Well, because I recognised it to be almost identical to this strip, which I've previously purchased and used under my kid's bed, and at the Indian restaurant that I kitted out last month. Except this whole kit with their controller and a power supply is half the price of the strip alone that I've bought and used in the past. The only difference being is that it's 24 volts, so I am assuming that we'll be sacrificing a little bit in the resolution department. So let's start off by plugging it in and seeing how it compares to the one under my kid's bed using the supplied controller. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug this one in and just compare them, do a quick side by side to see if they look comparable when they're lit up. Looking pretty similar, so let's see if we can get it doing an effect without having to pair it to anything. Annoyingly, that seems to be in some sort of pairing mode, waiting for me to connect it to something. I'd be surprised if you can't use this thing without the smarts. That's annoying, that's ruined that idea. As expected, the chunks of strip which can be controlled appear to be about twice the size of the 12-volt version. But other than that, it appears to be identical. Now, I bet you can guess what I want to do with it next. That's right, I'm going to chop off this controller and see if I can wire it up to our WLED controller and unlock some way better effects. So as you can see here, we have the strip itself, and what I think I'm going to do is start by trying to open up the existing controller so that I can get access to the bare wiring and potentially even hijack this jack plug to continue powering the controller like that. Let's see if we can get into this thing and figure out the best way of doing it. There is this kind of rubber plug here on the end. Oh, velcroed that to my desk. Appears to expose maybe like a reset hole or something. See if we can use that as a point of ingress. I'm in a bit of a tricky situation because I kind of simultaneously want to suggest to you guys don't try this at home, but I also, the point of doing this is to get the cheapest method of getting a nice pre-diffused strip like this working with one of our WLED controllers that I possibly can. And as you saw previously, buying one of these strips alone as a 12-volt version is nearly £50, whereas this whole setup was only £20. So as long as you know what you're doing, it should be perfectly safe for you to pull one of these apart. Obviously not whilst plugged in, as I'm doing here, but we can see in here that we appear to have 4 wires, which is slightly annoying because it does give... No, scratch that, there's 5 wires. It's slightly concerning. Don't know how you can see that, but there's a yellow, a green, a blue, a red, and a black. So my money is going to be on the red and the black being the power. So why have we got a full 3 other colours? I could maybe take a guess at why there would be 2 in there, but 3 is slightly baffling. There we go, got it out of the case now, so you can see a little bit more clearly what's going on. So as we can see, we have a red and black, and then 3 other colours. That's somewhat blowing my mind, because I'm pretty sure that this has to be an addressable strip with the effects that it was doing in the store. What does that writing say? Perhaps I can look up that little PCB label there and see what this thing does. And I'll be right back. Okay, I think I figured it out, and it may have paid off to actually use this thing a little bit before I started carving it up. But I don't know how well you can see here. I've taken a picture of it, so I might be able to put that on screen. But these are labelled, and so they are ground, data out, positive, and then we have a W and a C, which means that this strip blows my mind even more, because I'm willing to bet money that those are single channels for warm and cool whites. So not only is this a 24-volt neon addressable LED strip, but it has a built-in warm and cool white LEDs as well for £20. That's just absurd. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to use those channels with the controller that I've opted for here, but it should at least work for doing effects using the data out wire. And it has made me think that we maybe want to design a controller for these types of strips, because I have encountered strips like this once before where they have a more traditional style track for like warm or cool white LEDs that will light up the entire strip in the desired color, but they also have addressable RGB LEDs that are completely separate and require the data channel. Now that I've got that figured out, I think for wiring this up to my controller, we're only going to need these 3 wires on the right. The blue one is the data, and then we've got red and black for positive and ground. So in theory, I should simply be able to disconnect those 3, wire them into my controller, and power it. Unfortunately, because they've put the power jack at the other end of this circuit board here, I don't think it's going to be very easy for me to salvage that for our connection. So what I will probably do is chop this barrel connector off, chop these wires off, and connect them all to the controller in some way. So let's go ahead and do that. I am just going to snip. Okay, bye-bye to the old controller, and hello to ours. That could our controller could fit inside there with their entire existing controller. But to be fair, they must have had a little bit more going on with the white and cool white channels, so I think it might be time to design a version of this that can handle these types of strips. I really feel like I only have one chance to get this wire stripping right. Oh no. Dreaded failed wire strip. Luckily the one that's a bit shorter is the only one that's going directly into the controller. These will be going via a WAGO so that I can inject power from the power supply. Let's figure out how this is all going to work, shall we? I'm going to cut the power supply as I mentioned before, but I'm going to leave enough slack so that I can reconnect it if I ever actually really want to. As you can see here on the wire casing, there are usually markings. One of them denotes positive and one of them is negative. So in this case, I'm going to have to buzz it out and just check which one is the positive before I can go any further. So I'm obviously doing this part very carefully to make sure I don't short the wires whilst it's plugged in. So that says negative 24 volts, so I've got that the wrong way round. So the solid line is the voltage and the broken line is the ground, which is actually would have been my guess. Connect it that way around, we get 24 volts. Perfect. Yeah, 24 volts, the longer line is the voltage. Interesting tip here, I've now unplugged the other side of this, but there's often capacitors in here which leave it with a residual voltage for a while. There's still a couple of volts on there now, so it's worth just getting an idea of how quickly that drains back down to 0 before you actually do anything where they could touch. Okay, now that we have all the wires exposed, we're ready to connect them up, I think. So we've got those 2 WAGOs prepared there. And what did we just say? That this longer dashed line here is going to be the voltage, so that's going to go into these ones. And that into this one. I think the next most important thing to do might be to remove this strain relief completely, because the length of wire that I've got to work with here is almost nothing. But if I top this off and strip this back, then I'll certainly have more wire to work with. So I think I'm going to do that to be on the safe side. So I think because it will be easiest to do now, I'm going to start off by connecting the data to the controller, because those thicker wires are going to be easier to connect afterwards. Okay, connected nice and securely, and then these are going to go into the appropriately coloured WAGOs, so I haven't left myself much cable to work with. Okay, so that's all connected up in principle, so now I'm just going to take these bits of wire here, I'm going to check the port labelling. We've got positive over here on the right. Nice thing about this thicker copper wire is you can pretty much poke it into these WAGO terminals without needing to depress them, because it's just stiff enough to force in, like so, he says. All right, and all of the wires involved pass the industry standard tug test. And it looks a bit messy right now, but that is the proof of concept wiring at the moment. Obviously, if you wanted to, you could do some soldering in the mix here to reduce the need for WAGOs and such. I'm not a huge fan of soldering, and I'm just wiring this up for the sake of a demo, so Waggos will do just fine. One quick double check of what color wires are going where. So that blue one was our data out. That is our ground going into our ground. That is our positive going into our 24-volt positive. So I think we're now ready to plug it in and see if it works. Voila! That, if I can unvelcro it from my mouse mat, is a working 24-volt WLED strip now, using our strip powered controller. Now, while this does look like a mess, even in this form, this will go quite neatly in a very small junction box. In fact, the whole lot, if tucked correctly, would probably still fit in the original controller housing. Yeah, as you can see, proof of concept. The whole lot does in fact fit inside the existing controller housing. If you wanted to really wiggle that around and get it to fit, then it would. And as you can see already, you've got some pretty cool effects going on there. So now let's see if I can add it to my phone and get it doing something else. So it's currently doing the Matripix WLED effect, which is in an audio reactive state at the moment because we do have the microphone on board on this controller. And so as I talk, the effect travels down the strip. And if I stop talking for a moment, you see it mostly goes off, apart from the first few LEDs, which I've got configured to do something different. So I can go connect to its Wi-Fi and go straight to its controls and select something else for it to do. So this audio segment here, I can tell it to go solid. It is not quite configured correctly, so let's go to the LED preferences and change it to RGB. I think that has corrected the colors. So red, green, blue are now in the correct order. Perfect. So it is a WS28 strip by the looks of it, but it's an RGB order. We can set it to do Android, an Aurora, blends, bouncing balls, which is one of my favorite effects that I often have behind me. And to be honest, the minimum size of a section of this strip doesn't look bad at all. It doesn't look anywhere near as chunky as I expected it to for a 24-volt strip. So this thing is just an absolute steal. I might have to go out and buy a few more so I've got them ready for future projects, because that, and the only annoying thing about these strips historically is that they don't have tails at either end of the strip. So you can see this end is capped off. If you're willing to go through this much effort, and especially if you're willing to solder, you can pull this cap off and expose the internal strip and solder more wire on and go for a really long installation with a 24-volt strip like this. Well, and there we have it. One 24-volt Neon Flex addressable LED strip running from our tiniest WLED controller on the planet. That is just unbelievably incredible value for under 20 quid for this strip. As I kind of said earlier, don't try this at home if you don't know what you're doing. But if you do, this is an absolutely incredible way of getting a really good quality strip for not very much money. I honestly don't understand how other brands are selling the strip only for nearly £50 when for the same money you can buy one of our controllers and one of these strips. So don't walk, run down to Costco and get yourself one of these strips before they realize what they've done pricing it so damn cheap. If you like videos like this, and be sure to follow me for more in future. And as always, remember, home is where the smart is.